And welcome. We're glad that you're here today for Leaders Confronting Change for a New Day. I'm Steve Zimmerman, the founding partner of the Barnabas Partnership down in Danville, Virginia, and we're excited about you having the opportunity to come and join us virtually this year instead of in person that we usually do at the training extravaganza with the Raleigh Association. I'm excited about being here, and hopefully that we'll have a chance to pick up a few ideas that will help you as you lead and guide your group into a new day, as you work toward new things in your church, as we see these challenges ahead of us this time of this wonderful season that we have. Many of you are probably very familiar with the old passage in 2 Timothy verses 1-7. Paul writes these words. He says, "For God has not given us a spirit of fear and timidity, but of power, love, and self-control." Paul knew that there were changes that were taking place in the New Testament church, and he knew that Timothy was going to be facing some uphill battles. And he reminded Timothy that this is a day that reminds us that God has given us the power and not a fear to take what we need to do to make a change and do it well. There are some things that we want to look at in our time together this day to kind of have an opportunity to kind of see just exactly how we can maneuver this change and how we can lead our folks to a better day. Sometimes it's good to always kind of go back to some things that were there years ago when there were also some changes that were taking place in our society as well as in the church. And I'm going to look at three different things today, three different resources that may kind of remind us again what it is that we need to be looking at in change and what also that we may need to be looking at in our leadership skills. The first resource that I'll be using is Who Moved My Cheese? This was written many years ago in about 1993, and it was very popular then, but I think it still has some relevant to what we need to be looking at here in our society as well. The next one will be the Issachar Factor, which was published by Broadman and Holman a few years ago, and it's talking about how we need to be open to the idea of being open to where change is going and what we need to be looking at as we look and guide our church leaders. The next is also Better Than Success, Becoming a Faithful Leader, and this was written a few years ago as well, but it also addresses leadership and the different types of leaders and maybe some things that we need to be kind of concerned about where we are in our leadership skills. In each one of those, after we get through with each one of our sections that we have, there'll be a personal exercise activity on the PowerPoint, and I'd like for you to have the opportunity to go through that as you kind of deepen your understanding about what it is to lead in these changing times. The first book that we're going to be looking at is Who Moved My Cheese by Spencer Johnson. It's basically talking about the handwriting on the wall about change. Winston Churchill said, "Men occasionally stumble over the truth, but most of them just pick themselves up and hurry off as if nothing ever happened." And I think that's sometimes what we see in our world today is that we've run into change and we've stumbled over some of the truths that we've had for years and years and years, and we keep on going and never realize that there are some things here that we need to be concerned about that are never going to change but help us in our change. Let me give you an example of some of the things that Spencer Johnson was talking about in change. He said change happens. No matter what happens in our world, they always kind of keep moving that cheese around. What we think was true today is not going to be true tomorrow, and that speaks also very well with us in our craziness of our world today. Things will always keep changing, and it will always be in process of change. The next thing we need to understand about this is that we need to anticipate the change that's coming up. Get ready for that cheese to move. No matter what happens, we're going to have to be ready that what is today is not going to be relevant tomorrow, and that we've got to be ready to make sure that we need to kind of be ahead of it instead of behind it. One of the downfalls that I see in many churches that I have worked with over the years is that they're reactionary instead of progressive in what they're looking at in change. They wait until something happens in order for that to take place. And what we're looking at here is trying to say, let's anticipate something and look and see where this may go, because that's always going to be beneficial for us. It reminds me of a situation of driving down the interstate, and for some reason or the other, you and I have been caught as well, that we know that we're behind a semi truck and he's going slower, but we have been kind of daydreaming and we've not been paying attention very well. And next thing you know, all the traffic is behind us and we can't get into the passing lane to get around that semi. And so what do? We have to wait until the time comes. We should have anticipated this and been able to get around, but we didn't. The next thing that Johnson talks about is monitoring change. Monitoring change in the sense of we need to kind of smell the cheese, what he calls it, every so often so we know when it's not getting effective anymore. We need to kind of make sure that if this change is good, great, but we need to make sure that we don't just put it up there and do something and then not do anything about it and check on it every so often. It reminds me of, especially in these days that we have a Facebook, we're all onto Facebook accounts. We're all trying to do Facebook this or YouTube this or something of that nature. If we're not careful, if we don't monitor that, then sometimes we will lose the effectiveness of what we've tried to do on our social media. The other thing that Spencer talks about is to adopt to change quickly. He says the quicker you let go of the old, then the sooner you can enjoy the new. One of the things that we have seen that's taking place within our society in the last few years is this idea that those who have held on to what was familiar, what was true, what was good, sometimes are the ones who are not doing anything at all. So we need to adapt to the change. We don't need to throw the baby out with the water, but we need to make sure that maybe this water needs to be changed and maybe in a different tub for the baby. Next one that he brings out is to say change. Just change. Move with the change. If there's something that's going to take place, move with it. Don't stay put. Because part of what it is that these things will not be changing along the way. Everybody changes. As we get older, we change. If you took a picture of me 30 years ago, I would have had a whole lot more hair on my head and also a little less gray hair. But instead, here it is. Now you know who I look like and what I look like today. And in another 5 years from now, it'll be changing. And there's always constant change. And so we need to move with the change and adapt with that change as much as we can. The next thing that he brings out is to enjoy the cheese. Enjoy where you are. Savor the change and enjoy what you have done. Many times we get ourselves so wrapped up in the possibility of change, that we look at this and then we go to the next thing and we never relish what are some things that we do well. And we need to have that opportunity to enjoy those things simply because if we don't, we will get frustrated or we will get bogged down and we will not remember the times that change actually did very work for us. So we need to be looking at that as a very strong thing within our systems of leadership. Next is be ready to quickly change again and again and again and again. For some reason, change always keeps moving. What we're going to be experiencing this year is not going to be the same thing that we're going to experience next year. And what we're going to experience next year after that is not going to be the same as what we have here. It's always going to be change, always going to be going on. So this blip that we have of pandemic, this situation that we've had in our churches and stuff, this is just one of many things that will be taking place in the years to come. So we need to be ready to quickly change and be ready to go to that next level. It reminds me of Moses leading the people to the promised land. It took them 40 years, but they kept moving until they actually got to where they needed to go. That was part of the journey process. It was not the end, but it was part of the journey. Another insight that we picked up in things that I've seen in the last few years or so is going back to an old book called The Issachar Factor. Part of the things that we see here in the Issachar Factor are some things that I think is going to be helpful for us as we look at our leadership skills in our groups. Number one, they were talking about remain flexible. If you are going to do anything in your leadership, remain flexible. There was an old beatitude, if you want to call it that was needed to be added to the other beatitudes in Matthew, and it said, "Blessed are the flexible, for they shall not be bent." We've got to make sure that we look and make sure that things that are here are going to be able to be bendable and be flexible, that we don't need to be stuck in our ways. Next is establish a clear purpose of where you're going. Make sure that you as a leader know where you're going and what your purpose is. Because if you don't, there will be other people who will be setting the purpose for you. And that will set completely different things of where the small group needs to go. So make sure that you have a clear purpose of where you're going in your change. Change is always going to take place, but make sure that you have an idea of where you're going and why you're going. Many times if you have a good idea of where you're going and why you're going, the people will follow you. Next is keep it simple. Try to make sure that as you lead your group, don't overdo it, don't overthink it, don't over-criticalize it. Just keep it simple. Make sure that for some reason that everybody has an opportunity to grasp what you're doing and where you're going. Next is practice good communication skills. Make sure that you're communicating more than just orally, more than just social media, more than just paper, more than anything. Make sure that you communicate and do it well. Years ago, when Coca-Cola was trying to introduce a new product, and all of us are familiar with Coca-Cola, one of the things that we heard through the industry is one of the things that they would do is that they would try to introduce a product, a new product, 17 different ways so that the general population could actually pick up on what was being said with this new product. So we've got to make sure that the communication is continually going on, making sure that you send it out and they understand it in a lot of different ways, whether it's visual, hands-on, whatever. Make sure you're communicating very well with that. And then make sure that you have the opportunity to get feedback from that communication to make sure that they received it well. Next, they talk about in the book is be patient. Change is going to take place, but not everybody is going to adapt to change very quickly. Some will adapt quicker than others, and some won't. But be patient with these people. They are still struggling with everything that's going on in their life as well. So be patient with where you are and where they are, because change will take place, but let's make sure that we bring the people along. Someone has said that if you're one step ahead of the folks, you're the leader, but when you become 3 steps ahead, you become a martyr. Don't be willing to put yourself out for something if nobody's going to follow you on that. Talking about others, trust others for advice is the next point that they bring out. Make sure that you're not going to be doing all this by yourself. Good leaders bring other people along, and they want to make sure that as you bring them along, that they know that they can trust you and you can trust them. So trust others for some advice that take place. Make sure that you're going to be able to hear what's being said, maybe in your group, but also in other folks who also may have gone through this, that they are also very wise in what's going on, and give them some opportunities to help you grow as a leader. Focus on the application. Make sure that part of what you're going to be working with in your group is to make sure that they're going to say, what do I get out of this? Where is this that's going to have the rubber hit the road? So make sure that as many of the ideas and things that you work with and trying to get the change to take place with your group, always remember, where is the application of this? Where do I need to put this into play? Because once they see that this is something that is relevant to them, they will be with you and they will follow you all the way. Next is emphasize the long-term growth that needs to take place. Don't look at the small things. And sometimes what we have done in the last few months with this pandemic is that we have looked and said, okay, now we've survived. Well, that's a short-term goal. But what's your long-term goal that you're going to be here? Where is God going to be going with you on this? And where do you see God taking your group on this? And what are some things that are going to be beneficial for not only you, but also for your group that you're going to be leading? A next thing that we also want to be looking at is a book that came out a few years ago, Better Than Success, Becoming a Faithful Leader. We need to make sure that these are some things that we need to be looking at in our own leadership skills about what it is that helps us so that we can make a better change for our group as well. In Mr. Johnson's book, one of the things that he's talking about is this idea of what kind of leaders are you? And he mentions one, he says, the naive leader. And this naive leader says, I'm in a group and this is kind of where I perceive the group to be, but I'm going to be led by others and never really grasp the big picture of what I'm doing. This naive leader kind of has this idea that I'm not really for sure where I am and I'm not really sure where I'm going, and that is not where we need to be as a leader. The next leader that he brings out is called the jealous leader. And this is a person who leads the group to where other groups already are. They know that somebody else is there and they're trying to bring the group where they are. And they strive to model everything that the successful groups have done. If that group did this, then we're going to do that. If that is done, then we're going to do that. It's kind of like when I've seen in churches over the last 40 years or so, if they're doing a ministry like this, then we've got to do the ministry like that. If this is what's taking place, then we've got to do that as well, thinking that if they were successful, we'll be successful. That's not necessarily the leadership that really is successful and effective in the long haul. The next one that he brings out is called the opportunistic leader. This is where he leads a group where it only can stay for a brief period of time. The leader is hoping to move on to that next higher level of leadership position, wherever it is, and then they do that so that they can do that moving before they realize that the group is, oh, they found out who I am. Always going to be looking toward the greener grass, always going to be looking for something else, because they know that if they stay, eventually it's going to catch up with them. I hope and pray that you're not that opportunistic leader that comes into play all the time of trying to do all this, looking for something bigger and better, and realizing that if you don't, you're going to get caught. The next one that he brings out is called the greedy leader. Greedy leader is in the sense that he goes and works in this group where they can serve him, and it's going to be everything is pointing to the leader and not to the group. They try to add resources to the group that make sure that they are going to be entrenched and those resources are going to be at the leader's disposal. In other words, everything revolves around the leader, and he builds or she builds everything around them so that they are insulated well and that they don't have to worry about anything. The next leader he brings out is called the frightened leader. And this is a person who leads the group to where the most vocal in the group get whatever they want. Those with the most power in the group sway whatever's being done in that. In other words, they're the leader, but only on paper only. They are the ones that may be doing the lesson or that they may be leading the group, but all they are is basically a figurehead. That is not leadership. What he brings down to the end result is what we call the faithful leader. He says this is a person who leads the group where the group can accomplish God's mission. They don't strive for faithfulness and success. They just strive for faithfulness alone. These leaders do God's things. Above all else, they strive to serve God and God alone. And folks, if we're going to be leaders in these changing times, I think he had a good point here in the sense that we need to be faithful leaders, that we need to be listening to what God has to say to us, be listening to what faithfulness is, and don't work on success. Don't worry about others. Just worry about your faithfulness with God. Because if you remember in the scripture, when all is done and we are taken on to heaven, remember it says, well done, my good and faithful leader, my good and faithful servant. Didn't say anything about success. He didn't say anything about change. He said, well done, good and faithful servant. I hope and pray that through some of these ideas that I've shared today, that this will have an opportunity for you to become a better leader in your group, to be a better leader in your church, and that you have the opportunity to see God do some great and glorious things as well. I've listed these resources in the back of the PowerPoint presentation if you want to go and read these books, and you may have the opportunity to do that. I've also made sure that you can have a chance to contact me if you have any other questions or if you need some more clarifications on these points. Feel free to do that, and that's listed in the back of the PowerPoint presentation as well. My prayer is that you will have a great time as you see God using you in your leadership, as you see God working with you, as you become faithful to what God has called you to do. May God's power and strength be great upon you, and that we will see great things for the kingdom because of what God can do through you. God bless you. Bye-bye.